Joel Holst, after his 6-year tour in the United States Navy, including a Desert Storm tour, Joel graduated summa cum laude from Concordia in behavioral science and communication. He has worked in the staffing and professional services industry for the last 22 years, serving customers in high-tech and enterprise software industries, including high-tech, insurance, financial services, banking, manufacturing, state and federal government. In his current capacity, Joel is responsible for the delivery of recruiting services and customer satisfaction. For fun, he enjoys competing in local triathlons and running events and gives back to Austin area youth as a local venturing advisor and assistant scoutmaster. Joel Holst.
Thank you. Thank you. So this presentation has morphed a couple times as I've talked to people, and some of this is industry experience, some of this is use case, some of this is hopefully common sense, and some of it is downright sneaky, connivery recruiting techniques. So I'm hoping to share some of that with you this evening, or I guess this morning, or is it still this morning? It is this morning. There we go. It's a clicker. Let me get the tech here. All right, so what we're going to try and do is a real quick crash course on finding you. And where this started was when I went to college. Last semester in college, Dr. David Barker, who was my communications professor, said, I probably should have taught this course as a freshman, not your senior year, so that you would figure out who you are before you figure out what you want to do. And I've been working with this process now for, I'm going to say last 3-4 years with some of the executives who have transitioned, senior individual contributor type of people where they're 30s, 40s, or even 50s going, hey, what should I do when I grow up? And I've run this process with them in order for them to try and find that, aha, here's the next thing I want to do, here's the path that I'm going to take, and then we build a road for them to drive along. So we're going to work through that process. A little bit on personal brand, elevator pitches. We've heard a lot about that here in this group, quite a bit. I'll give you my approach on those. The dream job hunt, and then the power of 3. There's a really interesting relationship there. And then some of the sneakiness that I was talking about, going old school. We're going to talk about those things today. I'm hoping this is interactive. I'm going to be engaging with you. Hopefully it's a little bit funny here and there. Normally I'm used to doing this with scouts, so I'm always asking questions, getting them to engage. And teenagers in particular, they'd rather sit there on their phones. So instead, expect to get some questions. All right, just to make sure we're all awake. You got 30 seconds to come up with your 3 favorite things you enjoy doing professionally. 3 favorite things. Ready to go. Okay, we're sort of thinking through this. Some of us are writing. He already has it. All right, so while you guys are writing, John is going to tell us, give me your favorite thing.
Training people on complex software.
Okay.
When you get to the end of it and see the light bulb go on, there's nothing more rewarding.
Okay, what's number 2?
Solving tough software problems so I can teach other people how to solve them.
Okay. And 3?
Mentoring millennials.
Wow, bless you. Wow. Yes, and they do. And they do. Thank you, John.
They just think they can find it a little better.
Right. We'll get to that here shortly as well. So, is this tough? Is this tough to get to 3 or 5? So we're well versed in how this works. Some of us maybe a little bit, Maybe narrowing it down to 3 might be tough, which is fine. What we're trying to do is get to the things that we really enjoy. And what I do through an exercise with people that have put on this path is homework assignment is I make sure they find a quiet place. Sometimes it's with a libation that helps them relax. And it's finding the things that you really, really enjoy. And this is personal, this is professional. This could have been, I was on the championship football team back in high school. You get all of these favorite things that you've done as you've worked through your life. And pretty soon you're like, yeah, that was fun, this was fun. When I got married, when I had my children, whatever those life events are, you inventory what those things are and their stream of consciousness. And the goal is to then start pulling out, what am I most proud of? And this is one of these ongoing lists. Once you put this list down, you'll notice that there's a correlation to what am I best at. Because typically what you're most proud of and what you're best at start to align. And those may or may not be in the work that you are doing or have done recently. It might have to go back further than that. And it's important to find what those are in order to be able to get on the right path for where you want to go. Does that make sense? Okay. You guys have heard similar approaches? Yes, sort of. Okay, good. Thank you for your feedback. Appreciate it. These are a few of my favorite things. Is it? No singing? This isn't a church? Okay. Once you've made your list, literally circle the verbs and the nouns. Because those are key words, of course, that are descriptions, but they capture you in action. And they also are, depending on how you say them, they can be the explosive words. Your body, when you're talking about you and how you portray yourself to people, and there's certain key words that you use, your body physically responds to those. This is kind of that neuro-linguistic programming maybe you've heard of. Tony Robbins uses this. But these key words, you'll see that and you'll transmit that through your body. People see that, especially in interviews when they're really focused on you, but even in conversations that you'll have in your networking events. You know, you'll be like, so what do you do? Well, I'm an embedded engineer and I design chips. Oh yeah, well tell me about your kids. And immediately you'll see people respond, well, I love my kids. Man, we went camping and it was awesome. And I saw a bear and we were afraid and we ran. And it was, that kind of energy comes to life based on the verbs and the nouns that you use to describe the things that you love the most. And the real trick is, what we're going to do in this process is capture those. Because people get more than, 80% of a message by what your body's transmitting when you're talking to them. So cheat, figure out what those words are, and use that to your advantage when you're marketing yourself, however you're marketing yourself, especially in person. Okay? What do you think, John? Make sense? Sort of. Okay.
I have had that feedback many times before that sometimes I am lit up and on fire, and sometimes I'm looking for the door.
Okay. All right, so every good speaker is supposed to use other people's quotes to try and capture what they're saying, so it's not just me talking, right? So famous person saying, basically that's the summary of what I'm trying to get at. You know, there's words that you use that actually enable your physiology to transmit a message beyond the word themselves. And that's what we're really trying to do through this. Okay? All right. This is fun. And this is supposed to be in a good way, not the gossip way, but a good way. It's around messaging. your friends say when they're introducing you? And this is the important part of you meet someone, they become a new friend, and what you're trying to do is teach them how to talk about you. Okay, so we've gone through this process. We cooked down our verbs. We've got our nouns that actually resonate in our message. Now we need to be able to share that with, starting with our inner circle of friends and family, and then you get practice with that and you expand beyond that. But what's really interesting is if you set up and ask, how many of us are parents in here? And how many of us are children? Okay. Not everyone raised their hand. That's wild. How's that work? Okay. Okay.
I'm an orphan.
Okay. I didn't put that category on. Thank you. Yeah. There's always the other. But as far as being able to explain it to our parents or even our children, and it's real fun at dinner is asking your kids or asking your grandkids or whoever, what is it that I do? And hearing their answers. And then being able to tweak that. It's not fun for you, John?
No, nobody understands hot tech.
Good point, good point. And what's challenging is can you turn it into a message that they can, right? We call it that grandma in an elevator symbol, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think what's most important here is getting your message, have this energy, then sharing it with your trusted circle, and then actually testing them to make sure they know how to market you. Because that's the message and the magic of networking. It's getting beyond you and your current circle of folks. Personal brand. My goal is to be consistent across all the different circles that I'm in. So I'm a scoutmaster, I'm a venturing crew advisor, I go to a church. Can I use that brand in all those social circles? And being consistent allows for that brand to become sticky. And what's interesting is we sometimes get into these modes where I work this way at church, but then I'm completely different when I'm in this circle of my Boy Scout friends. And then there's other circles that are different social circles that you kind of, I'm the passive sit in the back of the corner person versus sometimes I have to be out front. The message becomes effective when it's consistent across all those social circles. So I would challenge you to think about that. How do people know me across all of those different environments? Once you've developed this pitch, the biggest way I've found is, what I do is then to have that person that you shared it with give it back to you. Because if they can't give it back to you, it's probably too long and they'll never remember it. Does that make sense?
Would you define what you mean by personal brand?
Okay, so my name is Joel Holst. I'm a technical recruiter, and I help technical professionals move from home to home along their career path. That's my saying, right? And then it's like, what did you just hear me say? What in
You're a technical recruiter that helps people move into their homes.
Great. So it's sticky.
So it's kind of like the elevator pitch.
It is. And it's becoming your brand, so people go, oh yeah, he's that technical recruiter guy who does something with moving. I don't know. But it gets to be sticky the more you say it, and when they say it, they hear themselves saying it, and it actually sticks in their brain because it's engaging more of their senses, right? Yes.
Just at the beginning of this, but what if you actually do have different identities? At church, I'm the guy who runs the jazz festival.
Okay.
But outside that, I'm product manager who helps companies make some product development stuff.
Okay. So how do you merge those brands so people know that that's who you are? That's the trick in developing it, right? Hey, I'm the cool jazz guy that also does product management. That's oversimple, but you start tying those together so it can be consistent across all your social systems. It is difficult, but then the real challenge is taking it from this long and subnote here because of this unique role, so that you become consistent with your brand across the widest audience that you can reach. Make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the bigger challenge of how do we cook it from here down to here. Yes?
He heard good jazz cats as well as product building cats.
Oh, see?
All right.
Nice. All right, so I was just told you can't sing in here, and my next bullet was going to be, we all live in a yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow. Okay, when you get that, right, you guys have heard earworms. My daughter is the absolute best at planting earworms in my head at about 7:30 in the morning. She'll come down singing, and she'll sing a line, and then she'll walk off, and pretty soon I'm singing that, and then my wife's singing that. So if there's a way that you can turn your brand into an earworm, you win. Think of it that way. If you can turn your brand or your pitch into an earworm that's that sticky, you win. Especially with all of the musical influence and talent that we have here in Austin. I challenge you to use music to actually tie that in, because people will remember the jingle, if you will, a lot easier than words. All right. Last night, this was a little late. I was trying to come up with, the quicker picker-upper of sales. I know it's a little weak. The MacGyver of embedded engineering. Well, everyone wants MacGyver on their team if you're an engineer. That's sticky. That would resonate with the hiring manager. Come up with those unique ideas for yourself to be able to be sticky. And if you put it to music, I think you're a genius. You'll stick with someone. All right, should be easy to say, easy to understand. And my goal is to be able to do it inside of 10 seconds. And so we talked about millennials. How long is their attention span? Less than 10 seconds. So you want to be efficient. And the funny part is millennials are about to pass Gen Xers in total population as a whole. I think if it's not this year, it's imminent. Yeah. And so that means, guess what? Pretty soon they're going to be hiring managers. Yeah. So we have to be able to be real concise with, 121 characters or less, I think. Did they? But is Twitter still relevant? Yeah. Seems like Snapchat's the next one. Pretty soon that will be irrelevant. Or they'll, that's a whole nother conversation. All right, so now we're going to transition into the elusive dream job. And I intentionally have this small because this was all the voices in my head last night as I was coming up with the questions around, what is my dream job? I just listened to a speaker, his name is Matthew Kelly, who is taking Christians through this whole Lenten journey. He talks about being able to truly dream about what are you passionate about and take all the rules off. Maybe keep the rules on that make it legal. But the idea is if you could really, truly do anything, and what would you do? And then you start trying to qualify it, right? Because you have to qualify it for yourself based on your current family situation. And eventually, you come up with your recipe for your dream job. And then the real big next question is, who will hire me to do it? And the who part, we've got various tools that we use to work through that process, right? We did the cook down process, we got our words, we got who we are, we got everyone dialed in. And this is still more criteria that we're using to qualify the dream job. Now you start the hunt. What I've done most often with folks that I've worked with is I literally get out a physical map, if you can find one. Google Maps will work if you have to do it on your computer, drop a pin, and you start drawing radiuses around where you want to live and where you want to work. And I start there because it changes how we are starting to look at jobs. The challenge with how we look is we immediately go to the computer and we look online. What if your dream job was literally right in your neighborhood, which makes the dream even more rich and resonant, right? And this gives you permission to go out and actually drive around in your neighborhood and see what businesses are there local. And no one does that anymore. That's how we used to do jobs, hunting, 50, 60 years ago. So that's a precursor. I'm going to bring you back here. How do you know that something's real or something's true?
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet. My 15-year-old this morning says, Google it. Right? Isn't that wild that in less than 15 years, that's our answer? Google didn't exist. Google wasn't even a verb. So we go online and we try to validate information and make sure that it's true. And what's really interesting to me is, how's a company doing? What do we do? Well, do they have a website? Well, who cares if you have a website? Are they really real? There's other tools, of course, you dig into. But it's interesting how, what if I went to their company and actually looked at them to see if they were real? What a concept. Okay, the other way that we validate information, we probably ask someone. Phone a friend. Talk to a perceived expert. Get everyone's opinions, right? And then now, social media shapes what is real or not real. I don't think we knew about fake news until just recent, right? That's a thing, fake news. So you have ways that you gather information and you use it to validate what's real and what's true. All right, so we know this. Consistently, everyone is, yeah, this makes sense? All right, so now we're gonna make a leap here. And this is where we start to get a little weird. Because this works. Right? You're looking at multiple sources and eventually you say, yep, I believe that. All right, now we have our dream job. And we're going to start zeroing in on where that dream job is. And I use the radius as an example. Sometimes because of your profession, you have to commute from North Austin to South Austin because that's where that job is, unfortunately. Or east to west, or somewhere in between. What's really interesting is now getting at the who. And you've got your companies identified. There's various tools like LinkedIn and Glassdoor and others that we use to validate. But what we're also trying to do is get in and find out the who. And this is where that power of three comes into me. Trying to find anyone at a company that you have a relationship in, that's the coolest thing that I've gotten from LinkedIn. Who do I know there? It's always what a recruiter looks at. And, oh, I know someone in supply chain. Well, I'm an engineer and I'm looking for a technical job. That sometimes doesn't help. I disagree. You have a person there who is potentially your ally, at least. And through social media, now you can influence their perception of you slightly differently, because if they start to hear things from multiple people about you, it changes their perception, right? You hear it once, it's like, okay. By the time you hear it 3 times, well, I guess it's true. And you think about that and how you leverage your relationships to get to that ideal person or that hiring manager. There's this weird coincidence that once we get to 3 or we hear something 3 times, or someone mentions it 3 times, it must be true. And I don't know why that science works, but it does. It's a behavior thing. And so now, how do you fabricate that into your advantage? So I have a friend of mine, he's a VP of product management. He had a unique background, RFID experience, and he wanted to figure out how to get to a consortium company called Mobile Wallet that was made up of the telecom companies. He only knew one person at the company. And it just so happened I knew a second person in engineering. And through a bit of research, we got basically, I think it was like the controller at the company. And we both used our relationships and we sort of usurped and said, hey, I know Bob who's in engineering. And we did a warm introduction. They connected with us on LinkedIn. And then through some dialogue, we sent their resumes to all 3 people saying, hey, the CEO is actually hiring for a VP of product management. Could you do me a favor and just make sure he gets this? And when 3 different people from 3 different departments go to the CEO at different times and say, hey, I think you should talk to this guy. It looks like he's qualified for our role. What happens to that person who's on the other end? What do? Isn't that weird? 3 different people? Then it almost feels like Providence, where they're like, I think I better talk to this person. That's too strange a coincidence to have 3. 2, it's not a coincidence, but 3, we cross some weird magical threshold. And so the real trick is, can you find 3 advocates? And if you can't, can you sort of fabricate 3? Because ultimately what you're trying to do is get to that hiring manager and actually influence enough to get a meeting. That's all you're after. And so that's the trickery of how to, higher level, that's the method. There's different ways, if you have no contacts and no way of getting there, that we can get into that person. All right, so we mentioned, okay, if you don't know someone, now what do? You quit. It's Friday, no, you don't quit. This is where the creativity piece of it kind of comes in. And you got to put your marketing hat on for your company of you, right? I'm still a big fan of do something that no one else is typically doing. And go there in person. There has yet been a person who showed up at my door at my office that I didn't at least give them 10 minutes as a courtesy sit-down interview. And some companies are like, no solicitation. Well, you don't hire people here? Good luck, long term. But the reality is, someone will talk to you. And if you can get their name, and then ask them, who would you recommend I follow up with? Now you've got 2. All you need is a 3rd, and you can triangulate this weird sort of phenomenon into something that's positive for you to get to the person that you want. Does that make sense? Not too hocus pocus? Okay.
You know, the E that you're missing there is possible and also regularly is you go to an expo where they're presenting or on a panel, like Southwest is you can go see that company do their thing and meet that person doing it for them. You go, they come out in public as fine people. You can go leverage them, right?
Networking events, if you bump into there, public, great idea. All right. Old school. Here's some of my tips and tricks, right? When's the last time you faxed a resume to someone? Oh, this is magical. Here's what's really interesting about faxing. No one knows what to do with that fax. My business used to run exclusively off of a fax machine in the early 90s. It's really wild. It's like, hey, are you at your fax machine? I'll fax it over right now. It'll be instant. For 2 or 3 years, I made a living doing that. Here comes the fax. Yes.
Even better, if you could actually find the name of the hiring manager, do the cover sheet to the hiring manager, if somebody finds the fax, what are they gonna do with it?
Right. So faxing actually works because all of a sudden you have this hard piece of paper that comes in, and people have a real tough time throwing this away. Really tough time. They're like, and especially if it's addressed to someone other than them. So you fax it to them, and then they're like, they'll set it on the desk. I guess I got to give it to someone. And so that becomes the challenge of the fax is, it's like hot potato. Who can I hand this to so I don't have to look at it anymore? Because I'm not comfortable throwing it away. And how easy is it to delete an email? Or just ignore the email altogether? Very easy, right? So now, can you find fax machine or fax numbers? Most websites put it on the contact information when you drill down into the About Us. Blow up their fax machine. What's the worst thing that can happen? You go around HR. Because you don't want to get stuck in HR. And recruiters, we tend to not like to deal with HR. We'd rather go right straight to the hiring manager. So would you. All right? So faxing, old school. This is one of my favorites when you actually know the hiring manager. It's a $6 to $10 investment, and it gets in their hand. If I was sharing with Craig Foster earlier, when we work through our recruiting process in our company, by the time we've invested in talking to the client, we've done an intake call or a meeting with that hiring manager, we've gotten his job description, we've helped him tweak it. You think about all that time, that process, and then what it costs us to present a resume costs our company about $800 a resume. And you're like, what? We got all that overhead in your business that produced the resume, right? And if you think about what does it take to get that resume in the hiring manager's hands if you overnight it, or more importantly, make them sign for it? Ooh. And who doesn't like feeling important when you get something in the mail that I have to sign for? I must be somebody today because I got something overnighted or certified mail. But it's interesting because think about what that hiring manager, when he gets that's going to feel like. It's not an email. I didn't even look at that. But I got something tangible. And then he opens it up and he's like, huh. He's looking at your resume. Isn't that what we want? And then we also do a call to action, which is, hey, coffee, love to stop by, whatever. You know, we're trying to get that meeting, which enables the relationship to move to the next step. All right, and as I've said a couple of times that very few people do, hey, stop by and hand deliver it. Who does that? Not too many people. Especially higher income, individual contributor type folks. Because, oh, that's not professional. I should just stop by and drop this off. That's where you're breaking the norm. Okay? All right, so what do you think about old school? Yes?
Good question. When you talk about dropping off or mailing or presenting a hard copy of your resume, what do you feel about using different colored paper and the watermarks that are on some of the higher quality paper? I was told at one point that if you use something other than white, like a vanilla or a lighter colored paper other than white, and when you print it, there's a watermark on those papers. If you have the watermark in the wrong direction or upside down, sometimes people look at that as being non-professional as mark being upright, the way it should be when you read the letter.
Yeah. So it's interesting, so I believe in the recruiting space, we've transitioned a little bit because, I'm going to say, probably 15 years ago, paper was important, right? Most of the time we're submitting our resumes, and most of the time they're not even being printed, and so the paper's not even a factor, right? But when we're old school, I'm all about, yeah, that feels good. That was worth me signing and opening up my overnight envelope. Because, you're going for, now I'm making an impression that no one else is doing, and I'm setting myself apart. And that's ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get out of his inbox and into his hands. And ultimately, that next step is trying to get us a meeting, sit down and talk to him. So if you think paper and the soft with a little cotton woven into it and all that is what you're after, if you're an engineer or an accountant, probably not, right? Black and white, that's all I need. Creative types, I would do that. Introduce color, even better. Just from my experience, you'll see a lot of different formats depending on the type of profession you're in. And that's probably a whole other discussion, is how to write a resume, and maybe a subtopic is what paper to put it on. My personal opinion is if it's slightly different color and it's a little bit higher grade and you're using that to overnight, even better. Because it's all the package that you're sending. And it's about being different, standing out from the crowd. Most of the time, if someone does print it, it's just going to be on standard white office paper. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right.
Put together a SWAT team we've been running for a long time, a SWAT search for the team. And we had a big discussion the other day about functional versus chronological resumes. At one point, I've been told nobody ever, they'll round file a functional resume, but we had some differing opinions. I suppose it probably depends on what area you're in, but your thoughts on functional versus chronological and how you get interest in that top half that they'll keep you going.
So my perspective is, when I read resumes, start at the top, trying to get what is the summary of the person. And then if it's, again, I read them differently. If it's online, it's usually top to bottom, versus if it's printed, I'll scan and then flip to the back page and read it in reverse as a career path in a sentence. So I'm also going to disclose something. In probably the last 10 years, I don't really read cover letters anymore. And I know we spend so much time writing cover letters, and they're important if you're handing it to someone. If it's a separate attachment, I just go right to the resume. And just being honest in how, because it's the pace of how many you have to look at that causes me to do that, and I want to see, I usually say 5 to 7 seconds, can I figure out who you are, what basic general area of what you do. And then I'm looking for my hooks in some sort of either professional summary on the resume or bullets, especially on your engineering and more technical types. Do they have the technologies or in the resume itself? And then that draws me in. And if I don't see those real quickly, I'll usually page down real fast to look for it. And if I still don't see it, I'm done. Yes.
Email sort of as the cover letter then?
Yes. Yep. No, and that's why I don't read cover letters. It's a separate attachment. I want to see a couple, again, what is my attention span when I'm going through the email? You get probably 7 to 15 seconds max. And so you want to be able to crank through, you should read this because, and this is the hook. Yes?
So you recruit in the tech industry
Yes.
particularly? So do you think that might differ depending on the type of job? In other words, I get going to the resume first, that if something clicks, then would a recruiter then go to the cover letter? Otherwise.
I can't speak like the accounting, finance people, because I haven't dealt with that in about 5 years.
Well,
Yeah.
every job I apply for, everyone says, you must have excellent written and oral communication skills. So
Okay.
I'm assuming those people actually want to read my cover letter, but maybe not.
Right.
Because I do have excellent written skills.
Right. What type of work do you do?
Well, low-paying work.
Hey, I've got a job then.
I work in education and community outreach coordinator.
Okay.
So a lot of organizing and there's writing. But I recently applied for a job at the TEA, Texas Education Agency, and they wouldn't allow me to attach. Their system doesn't even allow it, so that's the first time I've ever run into it.
Right.
I just encountered a lot of the searching and optimization things, just filter resumes.
Yes.
You don't have, so that means they're like looking at your resume, you don't have keywords in the resume.
Right. And then another,
Does that happen?
that's very true.
Filter,
Yep.
have any tools to do that?
Absolutely. Actually, agents even are auto doing that for us, right? And so the real trick on is in your header, what you do is you put on your page every buzzword, keyword that you can, and you color the font white. And so what ends up happening on your resume is those keywords are there, and your resume shows up in every search. And I'm like, why does this person keep showing up? Well, they can't see that you have all of this stuff in your footer or your header.
Actually, that can get you into a lot of trouble. That used to be a technique, I don't know, 20, 15 years ago. Lots and lots of people did that. And when recruiters figured that out, they were really pissed. And it's resurfaced again now as wow, here's a trick. And you can certainly try it. The recruiters that we've had before who have pretty much said,
Because they don't want to look through 1,000
yeah,
resumes.
if they figure that out.
Yeah.
That,
You get one shot at what ends up happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it varies with the company and the recruiter and the people, whether that is going to work for you or whether that's going to be a disadvantage.
I worked with Marv Bennett and Kevin Mueller to get my last job and found them at Roberts Partners to be, and they were phenomenally professional. I
Awesome.
couldn't say anything better about them.
Great.
So,
Thank you
pleased
for
to
the-
see the plug.
Yes, thank you.
Any other question?
I'll let them both know as well. Yes, question back. That's you, yes.
If you're pretty good, what's your opinion on pretty two-sided versus 2 pages?
So it's how you want the medium consumed. Meaning, if it's printing and you're handing to someone, I'm one-sided. Because typically you're making notes if you're actually looking at that resume in your. I'm highlighting things, and if you flip it over, it just bleeds into the other side of it. That's just my personal preference. I don't think there's a hard rule either way. We're in Austin, save the trees, right?
I've never heard anybody recommend double-sided.
Yeah. Yes.
Joe, question, you're on the building, are you near WeWork and Homeway and all that construction going on out there?
Our office is actually, world headquarters in Cedar Park, Texas. Discovery Boulevard is where we're at, yes. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I mean, the elephant in the room for me is ageism, right?
Right.
And we don't ever seem to talk about it. So you see all of these, I know it's against the federal law to put in 5 to 7 years experience, I think. But you see these postings all the time with that. If you've got somebody looking for 5 to 7 years, obviously you're restricted to a certain age, right? Is that,
Yeah, so
is that their way to?
in recruiter speak, what that really means is there's a target compensation they're wanting to pay. And just my experience, they have a budget, and they're like, well, we can afford a 5 to 7 year guy. That's where our budget's at. It's not. It functions, unfortunately, as a little bit of ageism, but from what are we trying to really look for is especially for third-party recruiters, I have to find a candidate that fits what their budget is, or otherwise I'm not even going to present them. So the challenge is, on the candidate side, is, hey, I'll consider that. You know, what is their budget? And the goal, again, around salary is make the other person go first. Whoever gives the number first sort of loses, yeah. Yes?
So sorry, when you send a resume in, and after 2 weeks you hear nothing, you figure, oh, you just went to the big bucket, and you don't think about it again, and then 4 or 5 weeks later, you get a response that says, thank you for responding, but at this point, such and such and such, meaning that you're not going to be hired or considered. What happens in the interim, from the time you send the resume to the time that they send you back a response? What's happening there?
So in my response, sometimes nothing.
Okay.
Meaning it's sitting in a database and there's 1 to several dozens, and depending on when the recruiter, a corporate recruiter or even agency recruiter, gets to that resume, or until they get to enough that they can make a hiring manager happy, is how fast they go through that bucket of folks. And so then a lot of the applicant tracking systems at the end of that process have an auto Dear John letter type of thing. So that's what you're getting, is when they've actually closed the job, it's an auto response. Yeah.
So for the people who they are considering, what's the consideration? I mean, what do they look for in the resume to decide?
Yeah, that's going to be specific to the company, the role, the geography, and the requirements of the job, right? Yeah, the hiring manager has certain criteria that they're going to be looking for in order to make their decision to screen people in or out. Yes?
Hi, how are you doing? I think this young woman is sort of highlighting part of the futility of just submitting job applications online,
Yes.
right? And hoping you kind of get a response. I mean, I've come to the point where I wouldn't submit a job application online unless I already have a contact in the company and I know, or I usually go through them, so that my resume will get considered. Because when you do it just online, you're hoping you'll get some consideration. I mean, you're in a pool of hundreds of people, right? And so it is, like, there's a low probability that it's going to get reviewed.
So somewhere around 4 to 8%, I've seen different job boards, of people that actually put their resumes on and they go into a company cold, meaning no warm relationship, actually get hired for jobs. So hopefully that's an indication of, don't spend all your time surfing job boards, looking for jobs, sending in applications. Now, 4 to 8% is probably better than the lottery, but we want to increase our odds better than that.
Yeah, but it's not as good as the 75 to 80% from the network.
From the network, exactly right. Yes?
So one question, because sometimes your same job, get snapped up very, very quickly, especially in the semiconductor industry, something like Samsung is suddenly hiring or Intel is hiring, and you feel it's really important to respond quickly, so you apply online, and then the next day, so you get contacted by a recruiter, and I've been told, well, don't apply online, because I'm going to submit your resume directly. If you do that, then you might get disqualified. Why would you get disqualified for having already done it, and then they submit something really good?
So what happens to the recruiter is, if they have an agreement in place, they don't get paid. If you are in their database and if they submit you, and if they submit you after you apply, they don't get paid. Bottom line. So what they're wanting to do is be able to get right straight to the hiring manager. Most of the time they have direct access to the hiring manager. And if you apply online, you're going into HR's database, and maybe they will or maybe they won't get you actually to the hiring manager. But what ends up happening is, about the time you get to the offer, then someone in HR, oh, we have Joe in the database. We're not paying that recruiter a fee. And that's what they're trying to avoid.
I've spoken to people who say, if we find you in both places, you're automatically excluded. We will not present you to the hiring manager because we don't want a conflict with the recruiter.
Right.
And so you gotta
So it
be,
doesn't pay the
you
client.
gotta be real careful about what the process is. You don't want to go out of the process because you could get kicked out depending on what the rules are. So we want.
No. Ask the recruiter. Ask the recruiter for guidance on that.
Get an HR person or a recruiter and ask them what the hiring process is, or a hiring manager is like, how do you want this done? Do you want it, you want it to a person to give it to the hiring manager? Do you want to go to the recruiter? Do you want me to apply online? I just talked to Sean, who was up here. There's a job that I've done all the bullet points. He said, don't send it to me. He said, you can't send it to me, but I won't put it in there. You've got to apply online. I said, does it matter if I send it to you before or after? He goes, no, it's no big deal. Just go online, they don't play those games, and send it to me so I have it too. So,
But go on LinkedIn and find somebody that works at the company and then submit your resume. It's also
or
very
find a friend who knows somebody.
Right. Especially if the company, especially if the company offers.
That's tough.
A lot of companies
Yeah.
offer.
Last question.
Sure. For your clients, when they give you a salary budget for a candidate, in percentage-wise, what would you say is typical? Like, do they say, 50 grand plus or minus 20%? Do they say 50 grand minus 200%? What's the kind of range?
No, good question. So back to our earlier question about, 5 to 7 years of experience. In every instance, we're going to ask them, what is your target salary? And usually that hiring manager say, well, I want to pay, $75K for this person. And then we'll ask them, if we find someone that's slightly better, will you pay more? Just to see what that limit is. There's never a real hard rule because it all depends on what problem that hiring manager is trying to solve by bringing that person in. And what I've found is sometimes if you pay quite a bit more, that person comes in and has a knowledge base that allows him to hire one less person because we can double work this person, so to speak. And that's perceived as more valuable to the business, and they do that. So usually your 20%, that might be a little high, plus or minus 10 to 15 is probably the reality, but there's always exceptions.